We've got, bringing him on the phone, it's Jeff Perlman, the author of Sweetness, the Enigmatic Life. I love that word. I keep messing it up. Jeff, welcome into the radio program here in Hammond, Indiana. Hello.
Oh, hey, I didn't hear you. I'm sorry.
Oh, no problem. There you go. Hey, Jeff Perlman. It's welcome into Hammond, Indiana. You're the author of Sweetness, the book that's been getting here outside of Chicago, here in Northwest Indiana. We're always Bears fans up here, although we're in the state of Indiana. And growing up in the early 80s, of course, I was a giant Walter Payton fan, and so were so many coworkers. And Debbie Wargo, I had to bar her from coming into the studio because she was like, "Why did you write this book?" So let's go right with that answer.
I would love to talk. Hey, I'm willing to take the heat. I'm willing to talk to people about that.
Well, why did you write the book is probably the number one question I hear from friends and family who want to know. So let's go. Why did you write the book?
Well, I write biographies. It's what I really enjoy doing. And here's this guy. I mean, this definitive, iconic, all-time great, superhero of a football player, and there's never been a definitive biography written about him. And by definitive, I mean, a book that tells his life-to-death narrative, what he went through, his experiences, desegregating schools in Columbia, Mississippi, how he ended up at Jackson State, his early years with the Bears. I mean, little things. I mean, when he died, he was eulogized at his own funeral for being 45. He was really 46. Nobody in Chicago seems to even know how he got the nickname Sweetness. I mean, a million different things about this guy. He was so mysterious and so unique, and I just wanted to sort of find out who he was.
One of the stories that really, one of the chapters is, it's a giant book. To be honest with you, it's definitely a definitive. But the story that's been sticking in my head is the tragic death of his father. I mean, that's just amazing.
Read the book?
I'm reading it through. I haven't read it all the way, but I've read that chapter, and it's just amazing.
Wait, I just want to say first and foremost, I really mean this. I really appreciate that you were reading the book because I feel like so much criticism, and I have to think you'd agree with me here. This is not a rip job book on Walter Payton.
It's not at all.
Thank you.
My friends from Carolina were just up. We were talking about it last night, and the whatchamacallit is they're well, why is he once again it's why he's writing it. And I'm telling them, I say, hey, it's about a guy and he's a human being. These are not mythological heroes. They're not it's not Hercules. We're making stories up. It's a guy who lived his life and he played a sport, and guess what? It's a violent sport, and there's stories about him. He's a tragic. The stories about him. I mean, he was nice to people. But behind everything, it's almost like that Smokey Robinson song, Tears of a Clown.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, there was a lot of pain there. And you mentioned the father. I mean, his dad, Walter's from Columbia, Mississippi, and as much of as sort of a positive, spin they used to put on it. I mean, this is the Deep South and still sort of a lot of backwards mentalities. And Walter's father, this guy named Peter Payton, was, blue-collar, hard-nosed worker, used to be known to drink his Mad Dog 2020, his great Mad Dog. One day he's driving home, and he stops at a convenience store, and he's kind of slurring in his talk. And people are used to Peter Payton sort of being drunk. He was known to drink. And he drives, and he gets in a mini accident, and the police come, and I guess they call home, and his wife, Aileen Payton, isn't there, and they take Peter Payton to jail thinking that he is driving drunk. And while he is in his cell in a jail in Columbia, Mississippi, he has a massive brain aneurysm and dies. And I interviewed, as you probably saw, the man who was in the autopsy and watched the whole thing happen because they assumed that he was drunk, and then they assumed he had a heart attack, but he had this incredibly powerful heart. And they had all these different ideas, and finally they sliced open his skull, and it was a brain aneurysm. And Walter later on would say, I wasn't mad and blah blah blah, but at that moment, he really divorced himself from his hometown, Columbia, Mississippi, and for years and years after, when people would ask where he was from, he would say Jackson, Mississippi, not Columbia.
It's amazing what this story is going on. We're talking with Jeff Perlman, the author of Sweetness, the definitive story of Walter Payton. And once again, it's not a sleazy book at all. It's just what, in fact, just reading some stuff up, and obviously being near Chicagoland, I've listened to other radio station stuff, so I've heard you on some other shows. And the thing that I get really upset about is when they're trying to push this because the brain things going on, like that's the big story in the NFL with the concussions.
Right.
And my one friend, she was like, well, does he talk about that in the book? And tell people why that's not really in the book about, possibly the leading to his death or whatever, the depression that he felt afterwards.
Right. Well, it's interesting because it was originally brought up to me by a Tribune columnist, and I couldn't believe this. This is when I knew I was in for a long haul. I was ripped by a Tribune columnist, another guy who had yet to read the book, saying, how could you not make the connection between Walter Payton and brain trauma from playing football in causing his sort of depressed state? And I said, and it's true, he died in 1999. He was cremated. There's no way to go back now and look at Walter Payton's brain and make that determination. And to say, just because of what has happened to Dave Duerson and what happened to Andre Waters, to take a stab and say maybe this was it, all it would be is a stab. And he asked me if I wrote about it in the book. I didn't write about it in the book because it would just be me guessing. And the truth of the matter is, I think the more important issue here, and one that really, again, if people would just sort of calm down and talk about it, is about what happens to professional athletes, and I think especially football players, after they retire, brain injuries or not brain injuries, the adjustment to life after being an athlete. And you are this larger-than-life gladiator, this celebrity. You can't do anything wrong. Everywhere you go, you're a hero, free meals, everything you want. And suddenly, you're basically just a guy, and you can't do what you used to do. And people want to hear the same stories over and over again. And more so, they want to believe in the myth. They want to believe that you are something. And inside, a lot of times, you're just thinking, I can't live up to this. I'm just a guy who used to play football, And I think, without question, Walter Payton went through that. Without question, went through that, where he felt he had to live up to a certain image that was put upon him by himself and also by the city of Chicago, and he couldn't live up to that image. He could never be what he thought people needed him to be.
Jeff Perlman, we're speaking with Jeff Perlman here on the Stew for Lunch show. And Jeff, when you were writing this book, and all of a sudden, you're interviewing you interviewed almost 700 people for this book. As you're starting to write this, and you're starting to hear some of these stories, what was what was going through your mind? Like, because you didn't start off going, okay, I'm going to write this. I'm going to try to find as much dirt. You're writing a biography about a guy that, like you said, is a hero of a city in the NFL. What was going through your mind when you started hearing some of these, dark side of Walter Payton?
Right. First and foremost, I would say sort of surprise, obviously. I didn't, way early on in this project, when I was first doing it, I said to, I think I met with his brother, Eddie, and I said, I don't remember who I said it to. I said to someone, I was like, so is Walter, he just seemed like he had this certain glow, and he just had this certain way about him that he was just above it all. I think that's what I said. It was right after I'd read Never Die Easy, his autobiography. And the person said to me, sort of, but not probably like you think. And I guess that was my first point. Even I kind of, buy the mythology a little bit. And I like to believe that athletes are sort of these superheroes too. I mean, this was a guy I loved as a kid, a real role model, and still a role model. And I guess as you go along and you hear about sort of the depression and maybe his marriage wasn't what we all thought it was, you at first you're shocked, and then you just sort of realize that you could be writing about the guy next door, or you could be writing about anyone, that this is a human being with who suffers and has faults and makes mistakes too.
Jeff Perlman, the book, once again, is Sweetness, The Enigmatic Life of Walter Payton, available, while bookstores are starting to close down all over the country, so you can go to online, you can buy it on Amazon. Also, you can find out more about Jeff Perlman at jeffperlman.com. And Jeff, just once again, thanks so much for coming on the radio show, and best of luck to you, and I'm definitely looking forward to reading the rest of the book, and I implore people out there to open your mind and allow that your heroes sometimes do have flaws.
No, thank you. Honestly, thank you for reading the book and for giving it a shot. I do appreciate that so much.
No problem. Jeff Perlman, thanks very much for being on the Stew for Lunch radio program.
Take care.
That's Jeff Perlman on AM 1230 WJOB.